welcome to Source Decode, your magic decodering to demystify the jargon surrounding the technology industry. I'm your host, Ben Coffin, and join me each week as I try to dig into what these buzzwords are all about, how they're being used, and who might actually need them. We're back for our third and final episode on big data, and boy, is it a big one. Today we're looking into the world of enterprise data usage, which may not sound all that exciting to a consumer on the surface, but hey, bear with me. In the past 2 weeks of Source Decode, we've heard about how cars can become safer and products are manufactured with higher quality because their processes are honed on the steel of big data. Data offers us time travel, it powers our artificial intelligence, it augments the human ability to make good decisions. So how does it level up when a major software development company like a Google or an Amazon takes all of this data and aggregates it into a single place? There are terms like data lakes or data warehouses, which refer to all of these repositories of data that get managed by IT teams, and those teams can spend their entire careers putting together complex systems and data aggregation tools so that the right data ends up in the right hands. So when you're dealing with all of this data coming from all of these sources, it's key to be able to sift through that at scale so that you can actually put that into something that is going to make a difference and at the end of the day, change how your customers see your product. You're trying to find your edge through sifting through all that data. To get deeper into how big data, and I mean really big data, gets used by companies to build better software, I sat down with Toby Marsden, the Eggplant Global Alliances leader here at Keysight, who works with the Eggplant software tools and customers who are trying to turn their organizations towards a data-centric ideology. We'll be right back with my chat with Toby right after this.
The moment you walk out to the launch pad, it's a unique experience unlike any other one.
It's a game changer for the militaries.
The biggest problem they have is how do I test the application the same way the user is going to do it?
So much more of the capability is embedded in the software and in the touch panels, and that's really where Keysight and the Eggplant capabilities come in.
I'm Allison Friedman, and I'd love for you to join former NASA Chief Astronaut and Navy SEAL Chris Cassidy, Keysight Aero Defense experts, and me as we discuss testing software systems for space and missions at the edge. Join us March 21st at this exciting new webinar. Go to keysight.com/find/space to learn more.
Okay, great. So Toby, thanks for joining me today. So I'm trying to dig through and understand sort of this idea of big data, and in reality, get an understanding of why it matters and how it actually functions, and sort of simplify it as best I can. So what I wanted to start off with in our conversation, when we talk about a company that's going to use data to make better decisions, where do they start when it comes to developing like structures or the collection of all of that data? It seems like it comes from all these different places. Like, where do you start on that endeavor?
Yeah, it's a great question, Ben. It's there's a lot of data, in the production of applications and production of services that we give to either our internal users or our customers. And with the changes that's been happening over the last 10, 15 years with the move to kind of agile software development movements and the next generation waves around DevOps, there's been a big shift from looking at really big kind of corporate programs and large streams of program work into more agile sprints, but also into product streams as well. So first place to start is to understand what you're focused on. Well, you're focused on either an application, a service, a product, etc. And then looking across the value stream. What happens in your organization to go from concept, the conceptual aspect of that idea, what we're going to bring to market, what we're going to do, through the design phases, the development phases, testing, releasing those applications, and then obviously operating in production. There's a plethora of different things that happen. And now, in agile sprints, they happen in regular patterns of 2-week sprints and teams come together. But in larger, more structured projects, they're kind of a bit more iterative and and the old world of waterfall in terms of what they do. So you've kind of got to think of it in that kind of fashion. How am I looking at this delivery stream and the value stream of delivering that? And then equally, what information sources do I have? Where is that data sitting, and what functional task is that performing in that value delivery of the application or service you're putting into the market? Once you've got your hands around that, you then how do you aggregate it together? You start thinking about, well, what if something happened in a step, 2 steps before I'm looking at the data? What am I aggregating to? How am I getting information passed through? What is it impacting either downstream, so I can predict changes as they move through that life cycle of development, or I'm looking at something from maybe post-production or further downstream in the flow that actually would help me make better decisions earlier in the flow. So they're bringing in data maybe around what users are really doing when they're using applications that helps direct application development and testing teams towards, well, I know that I've got a problem here, or I know I need to adjust the way that I look at my user patterns and what I'm testing today. So those are kind of some different scenarios that you can kind of start with and really help to understand how you get the best out of your data.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think as I think about capturing like an enterprise level amount of data, I in my mind, I think it's just dumping into different databases. Like, okay, you figured out your data sources. The sink is some monster database somewhere that IT maintains or someone maintains. But I think what you just brought up is interesting. The notion of context, like you do have to have some context to the data for it to be what comes before and what is contextualized by what has already happened in the process. And I think that's a very interesting that makes it a little bit more complicated when it comes to get that data from somewhere. Is you do have to know more about where it came from.
Yeah, exactly. And I think one thing that you look at with different software delivery methods over the years is there's the flavor of the month or the year, etc. But you need to come back to basic principles and architecturally what makes sense, what is impacting me from a business. So, and if you look at things like there's a book that I read years ago called The Goal by Elliot Goldratt, and he talks about the manufacturing process. And he doesn't, so he's thinking, well, I've got to manufacture these things that go into physical products. They're the component parts of the final product. I don't want to let a quality an issue happen to go through where I've got a bottleneck in the process. So, and you've made that real. You say, I've got to fire these components in a kiln up to a certain temperature to make sure that they're protected and they're gonna last long in the production world when they're actually in the physical product. What you don't want to do is you don't want to let all of that, poor quality product, if there is some, move through that bottleneck in the process. There's one kiln that can only push 200 components to it. I've got 10,000 to do. I want to isolate where the defects are before that step, right? So having the data available to you in the software development world where you can see that to say, well, it's these 5 area of functional feature sets that have the problems. Do I really want to push them into the next step of that process? Or do I want to get my earlier visibility to find that out and then make adjustments earlier in the process? So I'm not wasting time and effort at certain bottlenecks in my delivery cycle. And there's always bottlenecks. So you've got to find that. And that's contextually what you're looking at. So if you're looking at a product going from A to B across that development path, or you're looking at a large scale program, you've got to start thinking about where those issues lie across when I say the value stream of software development.
Yep, right. And then I think you're also starting to get into, like, I think a piece of that is hey, we don't want to run bad data through or bad product through a bottleneck, right? And that's starting to get into the actual like functional use of this data. And so once you actually have the data, you've built it out, and now you need to actually get in there and make something usable of it. What does that process
Correct.
then look like?
That's another great question, because obviously it's just a lot of unstructured data. As you
Right.
say, different products have different data maps. So you might call a product, it might be a product in one area of the flow, it might be called tool in another one, etc. So there's a whole process then of saying, well, what data sets have I got? How can I rationalize that data into something that I can actually use to give me some intelligence? Okay, so great, lots of data. What do I do with it? Well, you need to then start looking at that and start looking at how it relates to each other. So when I see something in this product, it relates to this terminology in this product. So then you're starting to map those different terminology areas into kind of a data structure that helps you to spot issues and changes that are happening. I get a problem in my help desk, for example. I see an incident raised around a problem that the customer's having. And I need to go and see what that is in my source code repository. It's related to this set of files that I developed last week around this new feature. But it's called an incident over here. It's called a defect over here in my software development path. I have to map the two together. So there's a process of mapping that data together to say, right, what relates to what? Then on top of that, once you've done that mapping, so now you've got some understanding and correlation of the data,
Right.
and you start building in algorithms that spot issues. Right. So as I said earlier, one of the things is you want to look at predictive scenarios. You want to try and remove problems and waste and a spend of area where you didn't need to spend, or you overrun on time, etc. You want to remove that through predictive analysis. So what you want to do is build a set of intelligent algorithms or alerts that spot those conditions happening in that data set and push it to the right team so they can do something about it. Okay, so it will go to the development team, it will go to my operation production management team that's looking at these things. Get that data into hands of them with intelligence to say, we've seen a problem, we've seen something happening, the data is showing us there's an issue, we've alerted the team to its response, and then we've given them some level of understanding and algorithmic support to say, we've decomposed that, and what we think has happened is last week in this development path, you introduced a new sprint, a feature, that went in here, but actually we didn't understand that feature had impact on all these other 50 features, and now has created a problem in production. So, mapping the data and then making intelligence out of it with algorithmic kind of capabilities, and then alerts to the right team really help you to get and use that data as a competitive weapon.
Yeah, the intelligence piece is something that, I think one of the persistent threads that's been coming through these conversations is I've been talking to folks and trying to understand, what I'm essentially going through is trying to hit the big pillars of software development and software concepts, because there's where we have, it feels like, at least for me as someone that is not formally from a software background but is sort of on the outside looking in, it seems like we're in a total new paradigm and new world. And intelligence has been sort of a persistent thing that's come through, whether that is legitimately specifically artificial intelligence in its application, or it's just the notion of even being able to sift through data and parse data in a way that gives you any information that's actually usable. So I'm curious, like, when you guys talk about intelligence, what does that intelligence mean on your end?
Well, exactly as you're saying, is if you're being in this world of software development, it's like having eyes in all parts of your head, not just the back of your head,
Right.
because there's always change. No matter what's happening, it's either a technology change, or it's a new set of business requirements that are coming down, or it's maybe fixing something that we shouldn't have let go into a production application. So there's always change to manage. So it's how do you help apply some sort of understanding of what's happening? And it's like I say, it's like having a 360-degree view of everything across all the life cycle, all the people that are involved in that delivery process. There's a lot of them. So when you're doing that, you're thinking, well, what can I do to augment what a human would do with the data? And there's lots of things from an AI perspective that we can do. Right? We can use AI to do very simple, repeatable tasks. And there's lots of technology out there today that looks at robotic process automation, or, kind of understanding when data comes in, crunching it to the point of saying, we've seen a pattern, we need to do something with it. So you're always trying to look at how you can, augment what real humans are doing, applying artificial intelligence in the system itself to spot those trends, those patterns, that then gives it to a user and says, is this a problem? There still needs to be a set of eyes on this, really, at this time. We're not quite at the point where we're going to let a system make conscious decisions for us yet and make the changes. You still want a checkpoint. Is the data right? So really it's surfacing that data back to a human with the right pattern understanding and intelligence. And then you can start to explore what the system's telling you. Is the assumption the system's made right and something we need to act on? So that's when I talk about intelligence. I'm really talking about the capability of artificial intelligence in a system to spot those patterns and trends and alert them back to the people that need to make decisions.
Yep. Yeah. And that's interesting. I think the hearing that at the end of the day, even the parsing of that much data, right? Of course, we need some assistance there, right? If we were to personally, individually, manually parse that, it takes way too long. And so this ability to say, hey, okay, we think we've spotted something wrong. But you make the call, I think is a big part of where the big data story is really interesting. It's being able to look out over what otherwise would be a incomprehensible amount of data and be able to pull from that some level of, hey, we spotted this thing that you otherwise probably wouldn't have seen, and then be able to act on it.
Exactly. Well, I was going to say, if you think about it, in our daily lives today, you get one of those monolithic, great big spreadsheets that people send around. You dive into it, and but after 5 minutes, your brain hurts.
Yep.
Because you're kind of looking at every cell and sort of, what am I looking for? What patterns am I looking for? So crunching through that level of data, and it's so much bigger when you're talking about an enterprise application surface and services. It's just one user would never be able to go through that level of data and understanding. So constantly, like I say, get the system to spot the trends and spot the patterns, and then alert you much better.
Right, and I think another persistent thread, as I've been learning about, how all of this technology functions, is scalability being a big core aspect of it. Is that yeah, one person or even a team of people spending their time doing this aren't nearly as scalable as the system providing you that to someone, and then that someone can then come make decisions and inferences about that.
100%. Yeah. Yep. You got to look at some of the things like the scaled agile framework for the enterprise that's out there today, which is kind of an industry standard around how do you scale all these project teams and product teams working on individual components up to an enterprise architecture. And that's bringing back to, like I say, bringing back some of the principles and kind of governance. I hate the word governance, but it's kind of control points around, enterprise architecture. Without slowing down innovation, competitive capabilities of the teams at the product and the program at the project level is really, really important. You can see a lot of these things coming out today where, we're trying to help to make sure that, it's not just one team that's going to be doing a good thing, because that team could be impeding with another team over here or another team over here, another team over here in what they're doing. So having some sort of aggregated view across the enterprise of all these pockets of change happening, where they can spot not only the project and the application level, but they can spot the issue at an enterprise application or a business level, really, really important as well. Because, great that you can move fast at the team level, but if that moving fast at the team level impacts your enterprise ability to deliver or your brand because it's impeding with other teams and what they're doing, you need to know about that before it happens.
And that's actually interesting, because that kind of gets into the next thing I wanted to ask, because you talk about basically having what sounds like out of sync workflows being part of one of the problems that can come out of this. But also then we talked about context earlier and saying, hey, but if we're looking at things in the wrong context, then maybe we're missing things or we're not seeing what we're supposed to. So where do the problems come in when you start to aggregate all this data together, whether that is in the aggregation process or in how you use it?
Yeah, it's a challenge because obviously you think you don't want to impede the capability and speed of an individual team by bringing in bureaucracy. Okay, that's just a no-no. The whole point of this process is either get products to market faster, customer value quicker, right? So the challenge is obviously there is by implementing sort of a governance framework is the teams start to feel like they're getting impeded in terms of the decision making that they can do. So you've got to, it's very, get that point, strong sort of governance architectural control that everyone's working towards standards, but those standards aren't impeding at the lowest level, the team level, because you still want a developer to go and create a feature. You want him to do the best he can in creating that piece of code. You don't want him suddenly thinking about at that stage, I need to worry about all this other things across the enterprise. Write the best piece of code and then integrate it into the systems afterwards and make sure that it's not impeding with other things. So it's a very difficult balancing act between the governance layers that you want to put in and the freedom that you want to give teams and individuals at the other side. And it's a seesaw. It's how much risk do you want to take on? How much do you want to drive in, and how much you want to collect, how much governance. Now, if you go back to some of the world and look at Amazon, for example, when, Jeff Bezos came into their organization, he said, everybody's going to write to an open standard. And now you look 10 years, 20 years down the line, the success of Amazon and how quickly they can move and bring new products out was tough at the time, definitely for people to change the way of working and the way they thought. But the end results 5-10 years later are just, so compelling that you've got to try and bring this level of balance into the organization.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think it's sort of the adoption part of getting to this stage seems like a pretty monstrous hurdle for some folks.
Sure.
I have to imagine that if you're someone working through your company's data and you're like, hey, I need to get started on this, but getting everybody on the same page, I mean, that's it sounds like a
Very
nightmare.
much.
Um,
Yeah.
and so I can, but I think you make an excellent point of like, by the time you get everybody on this, the returns will come in the future it's an investment that you're making, and
Yeah.
then the agility you get from that investment is the real benefit.
Totally. And you need strong leadership that, you've got to have a vision. That vision's really important. Why are we doing this? Getting people bought into that vision.
Yep.
But it's a journey, right? It is an absolute journey. You're not going to be able to do this all in one go. You've got to work out what's the priority in the first step, and then you've got to have a multi-stage program of work that continues to deliver value. What I've always looked at is to make sure those value increments are short, 3 to 6 months in duration, so people they've seen the vision, they've seen the first level of value hit because they've gone through a small iteration, and then you move on to the next part of that improvement plan and say, right, I'm going to introduce the next bit because people have seen the value in the first iteration and the change. That you get further adoption and further support as you go. So it's really important to also look at this for individuals and people's benefit. You're trying to help them be better at what they do, not just collect data for data's sake.
Yep.
So absolutely all of those things in terms of, strong leadership towards the vision, small increments of change and value realization to make sure people are bought into that on a long-term basis. And you will get you there over time. And it's not a flip a switch, suddenly it all happens. There's a lot to build in that ecosystem and, early adoption and warning lights that you want to put up to different individuals.
Yep. Well, and I think that's interesting because I actually kind of want to carry some of that forward and help me understand the sort of like the vision here that like when you talk about leadership wanting to adopt this and ultimately it's going to make it easier on the developers, it's going to make it easier on the folks working with this. How does it ultimately, when we talk about like enterprise level data analysis, which feels like as a consumer this thing that like when I buy my whatever piece of software I buy, I'm not thinking about that the company developing that is doing that. But how does that track to what the end user experience is? Like, how does this, propagate all the way to, hey, I actually as the like, can the end user, the customer tell that this is happening on the back end?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's really the central focal point of why you're doing it.
Mm,
So that taking that customer centric vision approach to this at the start of any of these big data processes and application development is core and fundamental to the success of the program. So absolutely, what the customers will start to see is they'll start to see regular innovation. So when they see regular innovation, they tend to stick with products and capabilities more. So you're looking at, as hold on, the bank that I bank with today has just brought out this new thing and it's ahead of my competitor down the road. I'm not going to change my bank account. I get the best service out of it. So that's one thing you're starting to see that regular innovation pattern come in. Second thing is the actual quality of the product goes up because you're looking at this data to eradicate problems and issues before they become a customer problem. The quality of your product goes up. And sometimes, the actual process, the actual execution of the process could become cheaper as well. So you'd hope that there'd be a competitive nature of passing through some of that cost reduction to the end user, or at least using that to attract people to your platform, etc. as well. So you definitely see that type of aspect, better innovation, more regular innovation, a huge improvement in quality because you're trapping and identifying problems before they come apparent in the customer world. And then, as you say, from an overall business perspective, definitely a faster and easier and a more cost-effective way to do things as you eradicate some of the waste and errors in that end-to-end process. So, it should translate into customer impact in all those three ways.
Yeah, the quality thing I think is a really like that's a really tangible one for me because I feel like and maybe this is my generation and the generation following mine of we've grown up with the internet almost like full access as long as we've been alive, and so this instant gratification sort of mentality that we all have is part of that. And I think about like trying to use a piece of software, whether it is, I use some like complicated music production software, but I all the way down to like I just installed an app for tending to my houseplants, right? And I think about the ease at which I will drop an app because it doesn't work the way I want it to. Like I mean, they've got minutes to get these things right, and I would consider myself to be someone that probably is taking more time than the average to give this thing a shot. And so I think it's it's very tangible because you have a very short window of whether it's at an enterprise level tool getting adopted or it's at a consumer level tool. You've got to make sure that works when a customer gets their hands on it.
Yeah, it works first time. Absolutely a principle we need to think about, as you say. I mean, it's not a physical product, so it's not as difficult to ship it back. It's just deleting it from your mobile or not in using that web page or that provider anymore, as you say. So, and it's getting more and more as you go through. I mean, I can remember the days. Unfortunately, I'm old enough to the point where it was slightly different, and you probably stayed with people for longer. But now it's a very competitive world out there. I mean, you have to use your applications and services as competitive weapons. So retention rates from your customer base is really important. As you say, if that experience is poor, I do it today as well, same as yourself. I download an app, if it's poor, it's gone. I'm not using it again. I'll go and find another option. I'm not as wedded to, a provider as I was before. So there's a lot of choice out there as well, as you say. I mean, the proliferation of applications in this domain, the last 10 years is crazy in terms of the number of different services we're using to not only attract but keep our customers with us. So absolutely important to make sure that you have this beautiful experience and it works first time. It's intuitive to use. It works if you're across different network conditions as you're traveling around different places. So yeah, really, really important.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I think the idea that, okay, all of a sudden there is so much more data that companies can be utilizing throughout their engineering process, and that they can actually build a better product because of that, I think is massively interesting and compelling to show sort of like, hey, when our consumption model is going to be very competitive, this is something that is necessary, right? You've got to adopt these things or potentially fail. And so I think it's a very, very fascinating point of view as I've dug through all this. How do we use big data to make software better or make cars smarter? There's this end thing of like, it's going to happen one way or the other, right? And so we've got to, how do we do it the best way is sort of, I think, where big data comes in.
Yeah, agreed. And we're still learning as an industry. We're not that old. Let's just say, back to the 1970s and the rise of really kind of personal computers around there. It's still it's a market in its infancy. So it's not like the automotive market has been around for hundreds of years. It's gone from manual manufacturing to automated production plants. We're still somewhere in the early stages of this. We're learning fast. We're getting the right things in place. And there's a huge amount of improvement that we can make. But as you say, that data's there. So bringing that data controlled view, using it to help you make intelligent decisions, that's going to get you a lot further forward quickly, much quicker than your competitors if you do it. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, great. Well, Toby, thank you so much for chatting with me. I really appreciate it. This is fascinating stuff, and looking forward to learning more.
No problem. Thanks, Ben.
Cooperation seems to be the name of the game when we're talking about big data. You got to line everything up right from the start. Data formats need to be able to be aggregated. Leadership needs to know what the data is actually going to give you at the end of the day. And the consumers of said data have to know that they're going to get what they need out of it. Talking to Toby made me realize about how intensive this process is of getting good, usable data, and how it really can derail you if you don't have the right tools for the job. It actually brought me back to the first episode of the season where when I sat down with Rahul Brito, who is at Harvard University, to talk about AI, sifting through all that data. In his case, we've already filtered down to say, hey, we know where this data is coming from and we know what we're trying to look for in the data. But when you're dealing with data, when we're talking about it at an enterprise level, you may not always know where to begin. But if you can harness that data in the right way, you can find the flaws, you can figure out where someone is maybe bouncing off your product or deciding that something's unusable, well, then the data becomes more valuable than ever. Talked last week about data being the currency. You can increase the value of that currency by figuring out how to get the best out of that data. Well, that's all for this week on Source to Code. If you found yourself thinking about your own data and what it can do for you after my conversation with Toby, why don't you check out this week's companion piece? With data analytics, accurate and faster design decisions follow. In this white paper, you can learn all about how to integrate data analysis tools into your design workflow and get to market faster by getting the best out of your data to avoid roadblocks. You can find that content in our show notes or over at keysight.com/find/source to code on the all episodes page. And if you haven't yet, join the mailing list for a shot at winning a Source to Code hoodie to rep this podcast and show your friends just how much you enjoy the show. The first 50 people to join the mailing list are entered for a giveaway that's going to happen in the season finale. It's limited to US and Canada, but go get signed up quick before the season ends. And speaking of season finales, our next episode is our last for season 1, where we're going to talk about the biggest buzzword of them all these days, the metaverse. So join me as I talk to guests from previous episodes and get their perspectives on the metaverse, and talk to the one and only Dr. Al Bovic at UT Austin, who specializes in vision science and video engineering. And it's all the things that we're going to need to immerse ourselves in the metaverse. So stay tuned for that very special episode. You are not going to want to miss it. Again, thanks to Toby Marsden for coming on the show and chatting big data with me and how to use it. It's a great conversation as always. Until next time, I'm Ben Coffin, and this is Source to Code.